Welcome to the RBH webinar, The Art of Communication. My name is Marcy Stafford, and I'm going to be presenting this webinar for you this afternoon. I am the clinical director at RBH. I've been with RBH about 6 years, and many folks on this call that I've likely spoken with. My team and I do the management consultations and management referral product and service, and also immediate support calls. So thank you all for attending. I hope this is useful to you. I want to let you know that at the end of this webinar, you will be able to receive the slide deck. We'll email that out to you. And if you need to log off, you also have access to the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel. So feel free to view it there and others that we have available. So let's get started. So I'm starting with the question, why? Why are we talking about communication at work? What's the reason for this topic? Several things. One is that communication in the workplace is different than other communication. We have some conversations at work, of course, but there's a lot of what we do at work in communication that has an agenda. We need to communicate well to do our jobs. If you're a supervisor or a manager, part of your role is to build relationships with your staff and coach and develop them. Also, you need to have those challenging conversations about corrective feedback when necessary. And you also need to represent them to the larger organization and vice versa. So it's really important that you communicate well. If you're not a manager in the workplace, you still need to have some good communication skills that fits that workplace culture in order to do your job well. And that does vary by culture. All workplace communication is professional, uses a professional language, and we can talk more about what that means in a bit. But there are variances among industries and employers themselves. So a stockbroker on Wall Street probably speaks a different language than a stockbroker who works in the branch of your local bank. And mental health therapists speak a different language than software engineers. So the commonality, though, is what we want to focus on, because even though we may be interacting at work with a lot of people that we wouldn't choose to interact with outside the workplace, and people who do speak different languages, so to speak, we need to work with them. We need to have a commonality so we can get things done. So we're going to be covering some ways that we can do that. But first, is my slide advancing, Brenda? Let's see. There we go. Okay. First, we're going to do a polling question. I'm just curious about, for those of you who are listening live, what do you see as a problem in communication in your workplace? And you can answer more than one of these. We'll take a few seconds here to choose your answers and then talk about the results. Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll. It looks like we have 74% voting for employees lack professional communication skills. 76% voting for leaders use ineffective communication styles. 15% voting for bullying, sexual harassment, and misconduct. 6% voting for profanity and name calling, and 15% voting for lack of respect for cultural differences.
Okay, thank you. And Brenda, I'm sorry I didn't introduce you. This is Brenda Allen, who is doing our polls and helping me with these slides. So multiple issues in the same workplace, obviously, by the numbers, 74 and 76% for the top two. Yeah, and then also 15% for bullying, sexual harassment, or misconduct, as well as 15% on the lack of respect for cultural differences. So profanity and name calling came in last, which I'm happy to see, but that's still an issue for some of you. So let's see if we can do something about that. In today's webinar, we will be covering I apologize for the delay here. We'll get better at this. So we'll talk first about uncovering our motivations when we're having conversations at work. You know, I'm a therapist. Therapists love to think about our motivations, but it's important to be intentional and mindful about why you want to have a conversation at work before you have it, so that you can structure it properly and have the best outcome. You also want to be intentional about who your audience is. Do you need to have the conversation with all of these people, or is it one-on-one? And if so, you know, think about their perspective in hearing it. So sometimes our motivations are not ideal. They're based on self-interest, which can be understandable, but we have the option to choose better ones. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about active listening, which is a strategy for communication that, again, therapists use all the time, and many of you may be familiar with it as well. It's very effective. It's unfortunately not used very much at work, even though it is very effective. Nonverbal communication, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about several communication styles, and assertive is the one that we're aiming for as the one that is the most effective and what we'll spend the most time on, but there are others that you may recognize. We'll mention group communication issues and differences and power dynamics regarding those differences. The differences in who you communicate with at work are really, really important, because, you know, human nature is really to assume everyone is like me. And until there's a problem, often we don't stop to think about, well, what happened here and why did this not go well as far as this conversation? And often it's because we're making assumptions that the other person has the same perspective that we do starting out, or thinks, you know, the same thing that we do when something goes wrong. And if they have a different, if they're part of a different group that is not the dominant group, for example, and you are, then that's not a realistic expectation and can cause some issues. So we'll talk about that. And finally, at the end, I've got some references for you to read and to watch by video if you're not a reader, that I personally found helpful and hope you do too. So thinking about our motivations, we want to start with the heart. Start with what's your motive for making this happen, making this conversation happen. Whether it's again a piece of corrective feedback that you need to deliver to a staff member, or it's an all-staff communication that you need to provide to the company at large to get them on board with a new idea. Sometimes in our work, we talk with supervisors who are new to their role as a supervisor. And so, you know, it's common to feel insecure when you're first starting out. You don't have a lot of competence yet, so don't have a lot of confidence either as a supervisor, and they want to be right. They don't want to look bad. They want to, be respected by the people that report to them. And that's normal, and yet it's not a great way to frame the interactions that you're going to be having with your people. So you have the option, though, to think about that, to think about your motives, and then to choose something that's more effective or better. So examples, I want us to work well together and serve our clients is a great goal to set up for communication. Or I want others to know that I'm reasonable and fair as a new manager. Or I want to understand other perspectives. So especially when you're tasked with communicating with a group that, you know nothing, for example, about their industry or their work culture or the way that they communicate. And we deal with this all the time because we have multiple clients in multiple industries at EAP, put on the framework of, I want to learn. I want to understand their perspective if something comes back in a communication that doesn't fit right with you. If you go in with the goal to learn, that's less likely to happen. So again, to identify your motives, you want to ask, what do you really want? And what do you want for the other person? I will give an example of working with staff that needed to have some corrective feedback, right? And, my goal for her was to understand the part of the job that she wasn't meeting the standard that her peers were meeting, and to fix it, to give her the information that she needed to fix it. She was interested in, a specific time frame coming up that would qualify her for a specific pay increase. And so we put together a plan so that if she achieved this goal in this area of her work by this date, then she'd be eligible to get that pay increase that she wouldn't otherwise be eligible for. So, my goal is to have my staff succeed, right? Not to make them feel bad or embarrass them or make them know that I'm in charge, right? Again, it's something that new supervisors sometimes struggle with, but is easily turned around. Kindergarten challenge is what I call it's a poster that was in my son's kindergarten class, and that's why I call it that. But I'm sure you've seen it in other contexts. But basically, you're asking yourself three questions before you decide to speak, or send an email, or maybe send a tweet. Right? You ask, is it true? And then, is it kind? And then, is it necessary? And if the answer isn't yes to all of those, then maybe you don't need to do that at all. Brenda, I think, oh, here we go. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So active listening. Active listening is, like I say, it's really effective, but it's often underused because there's a lot of other things going on, and we don't think about it. Again, we're not intentional about using communication skills. We just talk. But what it is exactly what it sounds like. You're listening to understand. That's the purpose. So you're giving that person your full attention, and you're not thinking about what you're going to say next, but you're really focused on what they're saying so that you can understand their message. Part of it is repeating back to them in your own words so that they understand that you heard them. And if you're wrong, they have a chance to clarify. It really shows someone that you care, that you respect them, right? It's a great way to build rapport and relationship, which is really important in the workplace for anyone, but very important when you need, again, to communicate something specific. If you have an agenda, you want to get something done. It's helpful to use this technique with those folks. And it involves certain body language, some verbal and nonverbal communication. So face-to-face, typically, you're going to make eye contact, keep eye contact, maybe lean forward, and you might find yourself unconsciously mimicking their gestures, nodding heads, and maybe tilting the same way. So you're again needing to take this as a separate moment in time without anything else going on. So you're not checking your phone. You're not saying something to somebody who walked in the room quickly. You're not interrupting them to add something that you think that they reminded you of. You're being patient through pauses. That's what the patient part is about. Giving people the time that they need to fully tell you what it is that they're concerned about, that they want to tell you. And then you have a chance to repeat it back to them and ask for clarification. So restating, repeating back a few of the speaker's words or phrases to highlight an idea, and paraphrasing, interpreting what the speaker said, contents and feelings being expressed in your own words. So you might say, for example, that I hear that you're frustrated with how this project is going and disappointed that we haven't met the deadline that you gave to our customer. Do I have that right? And see what they say. Elaboration is asking them for more information, which also conveys interest. Asking for an example or more information. And then finally, at the end, you can summarize what they've said so that, again, they know that you got it. Or they can say, no, actually, you missed this part. So, it might look like, I can see that you're really upset, and I hear that you're concerned that your team does not respect you as a supervisor. I'd really like to understand more about that. So can you give me an example of that happened recently? I'm okay. A little advanced icon is temperamental, but we'll deal with that. So nonverbal communication. When you're listening, when you're using active listening skills, whether you're the speaker or the listener, there's also a lot of nonverbal going on. So, take a look around this grid here, and you'll probably recognize many things that you've seen or use. Closeness, invading one's space, is a really important thing to be aware of, because it's strange, but most of us just kind of figure that out when we are in person with someone and standing next to them, talking to them without adjustments needed. It's not conscious. I think it just happens, but occasionally there'll be somebody that doesn't get that, and it's very obvious when that happens because they are too close to you, and it's uncomfortable. So you have to keep backing up. I think there was a Seinfeld episode about that. Usually, though, all of this kind of happens without us thinking about it, and if we are thinking about it, then it's not genuine. So it's just information for you. It doesn't always mean what you think it means either. If you're talking to someone and they're got their hands on their hip, that communicates something, right? Or maybe not, right? Maybe that's how they stand. Finger pointing is rarely a good idea when you're talking to somebody. Smiling and laughing, right? That's usually pretty self-explanatory, but sexual harassment, it's very common to have that be an initial reaction when someone's being harassed. Sometimes that's the involuntary first response is to laugh, nervous laughter, smiling, banter, and on the inside, very uncomfortable and angry and afraid. So you can't always rely on nonverbals. Tearing up, though, if you're having a conversation with someone and it looks like they're starting to cry, don't ignore that. Just comment on it so that you can ask if it makes sense to meet another time because this is upsetting. That's absolutely fine to do with information. So if you're talking to someone with their arms crossed in front of them and they're staring at you, it might be Finbar. This is my dog, and he's here also because I get to see him during my workday. I'm a remote worker, and when I first started at RBH, he came with me to the office in Portland. I worked there a few days a week when I first started before I became a full-time telecommuter. And so that is an issue. With remote workers, we don't have nonverbal cues, right? We just have the voice or, something else that isn't face-to-face interaction. So it makes a difference, or it can. The second polling question, I'm curious for all of you, if we could get that started, Brenda. How many, where is your organization as far as, remote work? So again, select all that apply. No employees work remotely. More than 50% of your employees work remotely some of the time. Some employees work remotely 100% of the time. I am a full-time remote worker. I manage full-time remote workers. I'll give a few more seconds to respond here.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll.
Okay.
So for our answers, for polling question 2, we have 61% have no employees that work remotely. 18% have more than 50%. 21% have some employees who work remotely 100% of the time, and 8% are full-time remote workers. 2% manage full-time remote workers.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that information. That's really, really interesting to me, especially the 61% that, most of you have no employees who work remotely at all for any percentage of the time. But I would answer yes to all of that one question. I'm a remote worker and I manage remote workers, but some of you do have some or are like me. So I will, again, just go over some of the issues with that. It does require some different approaches. It just, again, you're being intentional about your communication with remote employees. Pay attention to what's different. One of the biggest differences, you don't see them. So what are you going to do about that, right? A lot of organizations, they default to email as a channel of communication. And, that's fine. That works. It works well when, again, the remote worker has to be included in conversations with multiple people, and so everyone is on the email and everyone can see the information and who is saying what. But it also can kind of get out of hand. So, if you're sending the fifth response to an email chain, it may be time to consider having a meeting instead, right? And remote workers can participate in conference call meetings, just as if they were there. It isn't quite the same. There's a YouTube video I think it's called A Conference Call in Real Life. It's really funny because it's true. It illustrates some of the problems with a conference call, calls dropping and, you have to say your name before you make a comment and all sorts of things. But in general, it's better than to have that variety than just email for the mode of communication. And don't forget the telephone. I mean, if you would have a quick conversation passing somebody in the hall and you have to communicate something quick like that to a remote worker, you can pick up the phone. You don't need to make it an email every time. It's a little bit more personal. You don't have to worry about tone being misread. I don't know if any of you've had to hire remote workers or onboard remote workers, but that's another challenge as well. I worked for an organization where I was a remote worker, and all of us were actually, and we just lived in different parts of the country. So my team was on the East Coast, and I was in Portland, and we never met face to face. We worked together for 3.5 years, but other than seeing each other on Facebook, we didn't ever interact face to face. So how can you avoid issues that could cause, right? I think the technology now, there's all sorts of platforms like Zoom that you can use to at least mimic some face-to-face interaction and have that be incorporated into your onboarding process and welcoming process so that they can see everybody in addition to talking to them. And company events, of course, with remote folks, you can do some and you can't do others, and that's okay because there's benefits to working remotely. I couldn't participate in the potluck yesterday at RBH, but I could change my profile picture for Halloween, so I did that. And I need your help, Brenda, to advance the slide. My little cursor has gone away. Oh, there it is. Yep. Okay. So let's talk about getting a healthy start with having a conversation. If you start out with words that are abrasive, they tend to predict how you're going to be, how successful that conversation is going to be, understandably. So if you sound angry or you begin, you did this wrong, you never do this, you always do that. You can just hear the tone in those words, and that photo captures it well. Never use the words always and never when you're having conversations. So people are rolling their eyes at me, but I can't see them. Okay. Soften startups are much better because it puts the person at ease and not on the defensive. So they can hear you better and what you have to say. You can ask their permission to have the conversation in the first place. Is this a good time? You should always define the problem as your own because it is, right? If you have an employee that's doing something that's causing destruction to the entire organization, it's still your problem because you are the one that's bothered by it. Now, in that case, of course, most people are bothered by it, or the organization as a whole is bothered by it. But regardless of what the situation is, if you're upset by it, if you don't like it, and you need to have this conversation with the person that's doing whatever the thing is, you're the one with the problem because you're the one bothered. So frame it that way, Describe what it is, describe what you need to be different, and be respectful. This is on you. This is not me saying there's something wrong with your character. It's that, I really am sensitive to the smell of onions. And so, if possible, if that could be, confined to the lunchroom instead of your desk, that would be great, right? Some other examples. Is this a good time to talk? I'm having trouble meeting this deadline. I could really use your help. That's a good one. That tends to be really effective. I could really use your help. So now we're going to be covering the 4 communication styles that are pretty common and focusing on the final one, which is the one that we all want to do under the best of circumstances. Now, these are styles. These are not people. So any one of us can use any of these styles at any time, depending on, lots of things. How much sleep you got the night before. In general, though, people tend to gravitate toward one style or another and use it more often than the others. So this is information to be aware of in terms of how effective these are. If this is your default style, you may want to reconsider doing something different. The aggressive style, these folks are the ones that do have that harsh startup as a default. And what happens is that they don't get listened to. When someone is yelling at you, you're not going to hear their message. You're not going to hear the content of what they're saying because you're overwhelmed with emotion of being yelled at, typically. So they often get misunderstood. Their message doesn't go anywhere, which, they want to accomplish something, and talking to someone, that doesn't work. And they get accused of bullying because, frankly, a lot of that communication style is bullying or is perceived that way. A lot of those folks don't intend to bully anyone, but it gets perceived that way, which still creates a problem for them. And as a leader, they definitely are not building their respect from their team or their credibility. They're actually losing credibility. So they also may feel like victims themselves if they get accused of things that they didn't intend to do. Passive, that style is characterized by not speaking at all. So the folks that use this style, they don't tend to speak up for what they need. They just stuff it. And in the workplace, that doesn't often get noticed because, most workplaces we're not continually talking about, I wish we did this or I'd like to have that. But for important things, they're not talking about it means that a lot of times they misunderstand something that's going on. My boss doesn't like me because, he hasn't said good morning to me all week, right? Well, he hasn't said good morning to anyone. But if you don't say anything about that, you may not realize that he hasn't said good morning to anyone. It has nothing to do with you. So this is common, and these stories can get pretty elaborate, and then the person acts on the content of the story that they've made up for themselves. And, some of that can create negative consequences for themselves as well. So to a person that uses this style as the default, they see people who are assertive, which is the style that we're aiming for, as aggressive. That seems too much to them. And yet, eventually, sometimes they do blow up. So the passives don't stay that way. If they get eventually too upset, they might be the writer of the 3-page email in bold, all caps. Not that I ever did that. So, passive aggressive. So this is a style, I think we all know what that means. It's kind of a shortcut I hear people use. This person's just being passive aggressive. Okay, I gotcha. And yet I want to caution you not to, refer to a person directly that way or about them that way unless you are, talking to us and getting a consultation and want shorthand. Because truly, again, it's not a person, it's a style. It feels manipulative. It tends to be, folks that do resist any performance improvement conversations. They're very challenging to manage. They kind of tend toward finding fault with other people. And so it's hard to really get a grasp on what they're doing. Here are some examples too of passive aggressive behavior. Gossip is a big one. Anything that is drama at work, interpersonal drama, has a passive aggressive component. Withholding important information to intentionally undermine somebody else's success. So yeah, I'll promote you, but I'm not going to give you all the information that you need to do what I do, right? Blaming other people and just generally acting in their own best interest, but not blatantly so. So it's hard to call them on it. Assertive is what we're going for. Assertive is a style that is most effective at work, most respectful, and can really be used by anyone, regardless of the place in the the organization that your role fits into. So regardless of the power dynamics in an organization. It consists of treating others with respect, and you're selective in using your emotions, which means that you're in charge of them. You're in control when you're having a conversation. You're direct about what you want. If people are inappropriate with you in their style of communication, you're able to set a limit and address misunderstandings as they come up. And you're aware of your own responses. And if someone calls you on something, you can take a step back and look at your own behavior. Again, this is intentional, and it's most effective to use. Simple, respectful, fact-based, focused, and direct. So an assertive message, you often can use, again, I messages because, again, you're defining the problem as yours, and get that feedback like we do with active listening. You're delivering a message, you're defining the problem as yours, you're being specific about what you want to be different, and then you're asking for input. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? How do you see the situation? Here's some examples of delivering an assertive short message that is not a full conversation, but still isn't always asked in this way. Excuse me, are you still using the copier? Please lower your voice. I can't hear my caller. I need to interrupt you. I don't agree with what you said about. That's a really powerful one, by the way. If you ever need to interrupt someone, it helps to tell them that's what you're doing before you start doing it. This has been on our calendar for 2 weeks. I need for us to meet today. I find that joke offensive. Direct, straight to the point, speaking for yourself. Feelings can interfere. So again, when you're having assertive conversations, you're selecting your emotions, but you aren't always feeling in charge of those emotions, and circumstances can affect that, whether it's the person that you're talking to or the situation, the history of the situation, or the power dynamic. And when you feel angry or taken advantage of, or already have some experience with feeling disrespected, out of control in the situation or in the organization, it's really easy to get emotional and not be able to deliver that communication in an assertive style in the way that you'd like to. So what we suggest when that happens, if that ever happens, is to stop and just take a moment for yourself to take a deep breath and exhale and think about what that is, what you are feeling, what is going on. Why are you feeling this way, right? Is it understandable? Think about the circumstances. Think about who you're going to be talking with and why that might provoke this emotion. And or again, if you didn't sleep and skip breakfast, then maybe tomorrow is a better day to have that conversation. So think about why you're having the feeling, and don't judge yourself, and consider what are your options now? What can you do? We suggest that you just decide to pause, right? Pause on that feeling. Remember your goal. So if your goal overall is that you want to enjoy your job, your coworkers, and help clients, then that's overriding. So whatever it is that you're going to be talking about, if you're overcome with emotion right now and talking about it, it means you need more time to step away and come back to it when you aren't overcome with emotion. And your overall goal is more important than whatever the answer back that you were going to hopefully get from having that conversation now. Hope that makes sense. You can write down your thoughts about what you want to accomplish in having the conversation or what your goal is, and think about another way that you may be able to reach that goal. So the main point I want to emphasize is that if it's important to have this conversation and you're feeling tearful or just too emotional to have it without talking, you're getting emotional and talking about it, then that's a sign to you that you need more time. to step away before you have the conversation. It doesn't mean there's anything, wrong with having that conversation or with you. It means you need to push pause and get control of your emotions before you can have the conversation assertively and be effective. We encourage you to use us when that happens. We're available 24/7 if you are an RBH client. You as a supervisor, you as a non-supervisor. If you have the EAP benefit, you can always call and ask to speak to a counselor and talk about whatever's going on. Take a quick 10 minutes, get some perspective from someone outside your organization, calm yourself down, and then go back to the situation, and you may feel more in control of your emotion. I want to talk about communicating across differences, because that is something we have to remind ourselves of. Again, human nature is really to see everything from our own perspective, and that other people think like us. And they don't necessarily, right? Because everyone has their own experiences, and members of certain groups have unique experiences to those groups that if we're not in that group, we have no clue about. We can learn about it, but that doesn't mean we can expect the same experience in how to interact in the workplace. So when you're looking at this wheel, consider not just the outer circle of organizational differences in power and hierarchy, but also the features that are ours, that make us unique, and that also separate us from other people sometimes unnecessarily. I'm going to talk a bit about power. So in a workplace, regardless of what type it is, there's different power levels. The obvious ones, the organizational chart ones, but also behavioral ones based on communication styles, right? So again, if you have a passive aggressive coworker, even if you're not responsible for supervising that person, their behavior is going to influence your ability to get your work done, most likely. And so they have power over you. There's, in general, there's an expectation in those workplaces that people in authority, so the management level staff, need to be respectful and fair to the folks that report to them, to the folks underneath that level. And if they don't have those skills, or they act out of their good communication skills, it's a problem for the organization. It can be a liability for the organization, depending on what they do. So it's really important to be aware of these dynamics, whether you're asking for something as a person that's in power in the organization, or you're someone with less power and you want something accomplished, you want to be heard. You need to, again, use the assertive communication style with respect to be heard. So I don't understand why it seems like every time I ask for a day off, I'm declined. But Roseanne gets that approved whenever she asks for it off. Can you help me understand what's going on? Because I really would like to use my PTO. Versus, you play favorites. You always give Roseanne her time off. Show empathy, and again, use the problem definition of what you want. Facts, simple, and don't lay blame. You're accepting responsibility. You're having the problem. I want to point out this third one. Some of this is what we've talked about before, but the content to process piece, that's if, the conversation seems squirrely and you want to call out what the dynamic is. Sometimes that's very appropriate to do, yeah? and important to do. So I was, delivering feedback, for example, to a clinician who was repeating the same error over and over. And we had many conversations about this. And so there was a written report of his that was another example of doing this. And so I'd left him a note that just reminded him and had given it to him. And then the next time we met, he brought me this document with the note. And we sat down and he talked to me about why the phrasing in the note was really not the best and how I could have phrased that differently. So that's something, things like that happen, you call it out. That's really not the point, right? Although, it would be nice if you can apply that same skill to the documents that we're talking about, the problem that we're talking about. So call it out if there's ever something going on that is a process, not a content problem. We're winding down, and things to keep in mind is to focus on what you have in common when you're delivering any sort of communication. What are your mutual goals? Whether that's, as a company or as a team, you have mutual respect regardless of the person or the opinion of the person, and that applies even when it comes to the political climate of 2018, as we record this in November of 2018. Everyone deserves respect, and so keep that in the forefront when you're interacting with people who disagree with you, even who strongly disagree with you. And avoid the fundamental attribution error. So we judge ourselves by our good intentions, but we judge other people by their actions. So, if this person cuts me off in traffic, they're a jerk, but of course, I had to get to the thing, so that's why I did that. Recognize the value of others' contributions. Again, we can learn as much as we can about differences when we work with different groups in the workplace that have things to teach us, right? You want to be able to learn from others and appreciate what they have to contribute that maybe, again, is different than what you value, but isn't necessarily always the best way. So acknowledge differences in perspectives and experiences, because that's often how people do respond. What can we do to create a more respectful workplace? Before we take questions, well, I can tell you, we can read and watch more about all this, and I really, really encourage you to. Again, if you're not a reader, each of these references, and I've got 2 pages of these, has links to videos of the folks talking about their information. So you want to talk about race is a new book this year. It's excellent. I think every person not of color needs to read it personally. Amy Cuddy on body language, Simon Sinek's Start with Why is pretty interesting. And these folks talk about customer service specifically, feedback. How do we hear that, and how can we do that better? Receive difficult feedback. And then the title of his final author's book, I think, speaks for itself. Find it very enjoyable. So that's what I have. It looks like we've got about 10 minutes for any questions. If you have any, please, Brenda, how might they do that if there's a question?
Yeah, it looks like we do have one question. So what about a difficult bully coworker that I have gone to my supervisor and manager about, but nothing changes with the bully's behavior?
Okay. So you've gone to your supervisor and manager, and what have they said to you about it?
Okay. They've said that they would address concerns with the employee.
Okay. Okay. So I think it's important to know a couple things here. One is that it's good that you talk to your supervisor or manager, because they're in the position to solve the problem, and they also are in the position to it's important for them to know that the problem isn't solved. So they've told you they're handling it, basically. You won't necessarily know how. But until that behavior stops, they still need to be aware that it's going on, so that, something else can be looked at. If there's no specific steps that are obvious to you that are being taken, then you may want to ask if there's someone else that you can talk to about this. Do you have an HR person in your organization that you can talk to about this, and what you would like to see be different, right? So bullying can take on a whole lot of meaning, different meanings. So, if this person interferes with your ability to do your job, is a problem for your employer, and you need to make sure that they know that. And if there's something that you have as a suggestion that could make it better for you, let them know that too, and keep talking to them until it's resolved.
Okay, thank you, Marcy.
You're welcome.
Do you have a couple more questions? So what do you do when your supervisor is a bully? Well,
again, that's can mean a lot of different things. It's tricky, right? I think if you're characterizing it as bullying, then you may be right? And you may they may not know that that's how you're perceiving them. So sometimes it's difficult to have a candid conversation, an assertive conversation with a person like that one-on-one, because they're scary, right? Or you wouldn't be perceiving their behavior as bullying. So again, often there's someone above them or in human resources that you can talk to about that, and let them know, I'm uncomfortable having this conversation with my manager. I ordinarily would do that. However, he's intimidating because of how he, whatever that is that he does that you perceive as bullying, and be very specific in what those behaviors are, so that they understand and can address it.
Okay. Let's see, we have a couple more questions. Can you recommend any current resources for digital communication among remote workers, instant chats, etc.?
I would say short answer is no, because I don't want to recommend something I don't personally use or know that someone uses and highly recommends. Although I've recently heard that Zoom is a good platform for video. We used that for a webinar with a client recently. There's a lot of different technology, though. I think you could probably consult Dr. Google and find some good resources, and then look at reviews and get a sense of what's out there. I think any sort of chat platform is a good idea in addition to email, so that you have the opportunity to consult without having a lot of email strings on smaller things, right, that don't need to clutter your email box. But no, I guess is the short answer to that. But it's out there, and thanks for asking. I encourage you to look. I've heard good things about Slack, but again, I don't use it, so I can't really endorse it. Anything else?
Okay. I'm looking here at our questions panel, and I think for right now, that's all we got.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending. And again, all of these webinars are on our YouTube channel. I neglected to mention that for those of you that did answer yes to that bullying, sexual harassment question, we do have archived webinars on both those topics, as well as leadership and all sorts of other related topics for employers. So check it out, myrbh.com. Click on the YouTube icon and you're there. And thank you for joining me today. Have a great afternoon.